have. So thank you all so much for joining us for this Hacking HR conference. I hope you've been enjoying this global online conference that Enrique Rubio has put together. As Nabeela said earlier, this is, we believe, the future of these conferences. Over 10,000 people have registered to attend these really in-depth, insightful conversations that have been going on over the last couple of days. I am overjoyed to be here with both Tanvi and Nabeela today to talk about, I think, something that is the heart of the future of work, and that's digital transformation. So the title was given to us, but I thought it was really compelling. The reason why organizations live or die. So hopefully you find that compelling as well. Again, please use the chat on the side to let us know what you think and chime in for us. Martin, thank you for joining us in Mallorca at 1616. That's wonderful. So I am Meg Newhouse. I am the Chief People Officer for Inspirant Group, which is a digital transformation unconsulting firm. We are looking to disrupt the consulting industry by doing things a little differently. My background is in leadership development, professional development. I grew up as an instructional designer, so I wrote technology training for many years, and my journey has led me to where I am today. And I am so grateful to be joined this morning by, I'm gonna kick it over to Tanvi to take a moment to introduce.
Thank you, Meighan. I'm so excited to be here, and big hello to all the participants. And once again, welcome to the session. I'm looking forward to learning from everyone. And Nabeela and Meighan and Abby have been talking before, and I can tell you you're in for a treat over here. So I spend about 80% of my time with corporates. My area of specialization is leadership and careers in the age of disruption. And the disruption agenda is much bigger than the digital transformation agenda, although there are many parallels between both sides. Case in point being the coronavirus has nothing to do with digital transformation. It is a disruption, but we are trying to manage it with technology. So that's a good example. And I spend about 20% of my time teaching at the business school, so leadership and HR. I began my career in a technology company. My PhD is in organizational behavior, human resources. I have a minor in information systems. So without knowing it, I was getting prepared for the age of digital transformation. And my favorite and most go-to tool when it comes to leadership and disruption and transformation is actually storytelling. So I'll be talking about more of that later.
Thank you so much, Tanvi. I'm noticing a little bit of feedback. So Nabeela and Tanvi, when you are not speaking, I just encourage you to put it on mute, but please, of course, chime in as the moment strikes you. So Nabeela, please take a moment to introduce yourself to our.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Meighan and Tanvi, and I'm really excited to be here with all of you. My name is Nabeela. I'm leading our digital transformation globally on behalf of Ingka, also probably known for most of the participants here as IKEA. And we're the largest home furnishing retailer in the world, and a brand I think that's widely respected and grown over the last 75 years. I'm a retail junkie. I've grown up in retail. I've only worked for 2 employers in my entire career, so Starbucks Coffee and IKEA. And I've really kind of spent my space in both the people and culture dimension, but also in the full P&L accountability in the operation and what does it really mean to run and operate and digitize our business. So it's a really, I think, similar to Tanvi's comment, I think a great training for this type of role and responsibility. I also have the pleasure of actually sitting on a board for TaskRabbit, which is a company that we acquired in 2017, which is a gig economy platform, and also sit on other boards related to the future of work. So it's a great kind of marriage of all things related to digital transformation and the future of work in people and culture space. So I'm super excited to be here and be part of this conversation with all of you.
Wonderful. I love TaskRabbit. I had no idea. Look, I'm already learning. We're just in the introductions. That's great. Thank you so much for introducing. I hope all of you are just as excited as we are for the conversation. So let's jump right in. Tanvi, so we talk about the buzz term, digital transformation, right? So I'm just curious, in your opinion, what is digital transformation, and actually, what is it not? Just check your mute real quick, Tanvi. I told you to go on mute, and now I'm telling you to come off.
Right. No, thank you for that question. It's a great question to ask because if you Googled it right now, you'll probably come up with many different definitions of digital transformation. And of course, it all depends on the bias of the author. If you're talking to someone who's a hardcore techie, they'll give you a very technical definition of what's going on. And so we must take into account the biases of the people writing the definition of digital transformation. So I have my own biased definition, if you may, on what is digital transformation. But actually, I want to talk a little bit about what it's not first, so that it becomes a little bit clearer. There are different stages in which we are interacting with technology in organizations nowadays. And very often it starts with digitization, which is a lot about taking your physical assets and putting them online. So, a mom and pop store going into e-commerce is also an example of digitization. When Amazon tried to become a bookseller, which is where it started, it's an example of digitization, right? From digitization, we move to digital, all right? And digital now, we're talking about harvesting the technology to add to the value proposition of the company. So previously, if Amazon was trying to sell books, now it gets into digital downloads, it gets into subscriptions. New York Times, which was selling newspapers earlier, now gets into firewalls for their content, etc. So now we are starting to extract value from digital. And then only can we start talking about digital transformation. And to me, digital transformation is fundamentally about taking advantage of digital technology to reconfigure our strategy, process, and structure in the way organizations go to market. And so bear with me as I channel a little bit of the academic in me here. But I like to tell people that here's how you imagine it. Okay, this is the simplest way to imagine it. I want you to draw a triangle, okay? If you have a paper, draw a triangle. If you don't, just imagine it. And I want you to write people, process, technology, which we all know about, at the three corners, and write business in the center. So the center of the triangle says business, and then people, process, technology. That's how traditional businesses were conceptualized and run. Now, we enter the age of digital transformation. That's exactly right. Thank you so much. That's why you're an instructional designer, because you're just on point, Meighan. Well done. Now you need to draw a second triangle, which is, according to me, the digital transformation triangle. In the center now, you write technology. And then in the three corners, you still have people and process, but now business is on top. Which means what? Which means that in digital transformation, the way people interact with technology and the experiences that they have within the organization changes due to technology. The way customers interact with technology and come in contact with your organization also changes. Your processes change as a result of technology. And if you are lucky, your business model also may transform because of technology. So that's the shift from the traditional triangle to the digital transformation triangle. And going back to the example of Amazon, Amazon is now talking about becoming the world's largest store or world's largest grocer. So you can see beautifully how digital transformation plays out from the series of digitization, digital, and digital transformation. And this matters because for HR professionals, how we respond to change, how we think about our processes, what we do to help people move along, it matters in recognizing where you are in your journey. So that's my take on digital transformation, Meighan.
Sorry, I was on mute and I'm just looking at my triangles. That makes so much sense to me, right? And it's all the same thing, but it's a mindset shift, isn't it? Really thinking about moving from even what digitization is into this whole transformation piece, which is an incredible way of looking at it. Thank you so much, Tanvi. So, I mean, digital transformation, however, is just transformation. Nabeela, I know you've been deep in transformation at your organization. Can you tell us what else we should be thinking about besides just this digital transformation?
Absolutely, and I think Tanvi, that's a great starting point, a way of thinking about it. So thank you for sharing that. So I think, you know, for us at IKEA, we've actually we have an amazingly successful business model, and we've actually have this kind of part of our culture and values is continuously to renew and improve, and we've actually done that like over and over and over again. I love to share the story that the actual our model, our founder actually started IKEA by selling pens and notepads from a small shed that he had in his backyard in the forests of Sweden. And from that, I think continuously evolving the business model to meet customers and add value, and today becoming the largest home furnishing retailer in the world. So we have this in our DNA to continuously renew and improve and challenge ourselves to evaluate how do we add value. And so we've actually set out in the last 3 years to change everything almost. And that's how we introduced it to our organization. Our CEO, went on a world tour, and he actually visited with all of our countries, listening with big ears to some of the biggest problems that we were facing, that our customers were facing, that our coworkers were facing. And then he reflected back those big problems, and we call them opportunities that we need to solve on behalf of the many people, because our ambition is really to improve the everyday lives of the many people. And we believe that the world is a better place with IKEA in it, and we want to be here for the next 75 years and the 75 years after that. And so in order to do that, we said we need to change everything almost. And that was the starting point. And so we actually have, multiple massive transformations that are underway. And our digital transformation is just one of those many transformations under that umbrella. And then I think if we zoom in specifically within our digital transformation, we've also, put some really core pillars at the center of that. And the first one is really empowering our coworkers and meeting our customers in a new way. We see these massive demographic shifts happening all around the world. We know that people's wallets are getting thinner. We know that people are moving into the cities. We know that convenience and time, people are time starved, and they're really looking for that convenience. And we know that we can meet them in a better way to kind of fulfill their needs in this new kind of world that we're living in. We also, see the needs that our coworkers have, right? And really the future of how they want to work, and how do we work with 5 and 6 generations at the same time. We also know that we need to modernize our foundation and to build a digital foundation that is really kind of, modular, and that allows us to work with agility and scale at speed across 31 countries at the same time. So I think, one of the big shifts we're making is, how do we build agility into the totality of our organization, as an example. And then the other really big part of it is putting data at the core of our organization. We know that data is the currency of the future. So how do we really put that at the core of our organization? And this is something that is a big transformation for us, because we're a belief company. We're leading with the heart and the gut, and with experience and seniority, and how do we marry that with data in a way that really also respects who we are and the culture and values that we have. So these are the core pillars of our digital transformation, but it's under a much bigger umbrella of building a whole new IKEA for the future.
Well, and thank you so much, Nabeela. And people and data aren't mutually exclusive, are they? You use your data to inform your people decisions. I think that is also a mindset shift. I feel like we're going to be thinking a lot about mindset shifts throughout this entire conversation today. It really is changing from where you are and where you're comfortable to seeing the vision of where that you want to go. Thank you for sharing that. And I think, I personally am a gigantic fan of IKEA. So even hearing, a little snippet of all the wonderful things that you're doing at that organization makes me love you even more. So with that in mind, right, that people and data are not mutually exclusive, Tanvi, can you talk to us a little bit about how HR leaders can help to lead these transformations with people in mind? And when you're sharing some of these storytelling ideas, Jackie had a great question, is how can we gauge if that storytelling is actually transforming, if it's transformational? So if you can touch on that as.
Yeah, so maybe I'll just start there. So I think that the first thing that HR professionals need to do is to nail the narrative, as I call it, okay? You have to nail the narrative of change. And as Nabeela was sharing, there are many different types of change that are happening simultaneously. And so you need to have stories of change, but then you need a narrative of change. Now, what's the difference, you might ask? The difference is that storytelling is specific to the particular type of change you're trying to bring in and the particular group that you're trying to move forward in the transformation. But the overall narrative is common. So in the case of IKEA, it could be we want to be there for the next 75 years to meet the needs of the people and the changing populations. I'm just making this up, right? So that could be the narrative. But when it comes to the supply chain people within IKEA, it could be one type of story that connects them to the narrative. The HR group might connect with a different story to the narrative. The finance people, technology people might connect with a third story to the narrative, right? So nailing the narrative is really important because it's like a sense-making device that keeps everybody, no matter which highway they are on, no matter what exit they are taking, to reach the exact same destination, so to speak, right? And so, you know, there are so many parts to the change. You know, I always tell people that, you know, digital transformation has no destination. It's like a wheel that is moving. And as the wheel turns, your stories must turn as well. The stories you would tell to a group of people when you're at the start of a transformation are very different from the stories you would tell when you're in the trenches of transformation, and very different from stories that you would tell when you are reaching at the end of the destination and find that doesn't look like the destination we had in mind, but that's where we have reached. So, you know, as HR professionals, can you and your leaders, you know, tell the story of change, carry people with you? Now, it's interesting that we talked about data, because I always tell people data is good, but data wrapped in story is great. And that's because people don't intuitively just take numbers in. If you can wrap it. So if I just told you right now that only 1 in 3 companies are succeeding in digital transformation, only 1 in 3, right? The rest of it, are of the $9 trillion that was spent last year, has gone down the drain. And so the question is, what can HR do to stop that drain? That's you know, a much more memorable way of talking about it versus just throwing a number saying 33% of the companies don't succeed at digital transformation. So how do you take data and wrap it in story? So, you know, that would be. Now, coming to the question that you had raised about how do we know storytelling is working? That's a great question to ask. Storytelling and transformation, I say, has to be measured by 3 things, okay? Is it helping your people think differently? Is it helping your people feel differently? And is it helping your people do differently? And you have to hit all 3 markers, and then you know your story is a success. And since this is not a storytelling workshop, which I do, but this is not one, so I'm not going to get into more details than that. But really quickly, you know, nail the narrative of change. The second part I would say is establish a culture of courage, because I think we underestimate what this takes out of our people. You know, we are asking them to kind of go through this dark tunnel. We are not sure what's on the other side, and we say, just come with us. I love this example of ING, okay, where they have these teams of entrepreneurs where they created this acronym called PIE, where when people were working cross-functionally on projects that were risky, and we didn't know whether they were going to work or not, they said, you're going to be governed by the PIE, which is protect you, which means if the project goes wrong, you still have your original job to come back to. So people were willing to try something new. The I was for independence. You have your own resources and decision-making capabilities. We will not keep putting you through the same checklist that we put the rest of the organization through. And E was encouraging the kind of change that people have to go through. So cultures of courage is the second. And the third one really quickly is just HR needing to become bilingual really quickly. You can't just talk HR anymore. You have to talk HR and technology, both simultaneously. So those 3 things: nail the narrative, cultures of courage, and become bilingual. That would be my suggestion.
applicable, and the chat's blowing up over there. So very relevant, very, your message is resonating, Tanvi. Thank you so much for sharing that. So nail the narrative, culture of courage, and become bilingual, which I think we can all think about how we can apply that in our own organizations. I think that really makes sense. And those are small steps that we can take every day to start to change that wheel. Something that you were talking about, Martin had a question, and he was asking about the study that 1 in 3 digital transformations succeed. And I think that really hit home with everybody. I think, did you use trillions with a T of the amount of money that's getting spent on?
Yes.
I thought that's what I heard. I just wanted to confirm.
Was 9 trillion, and I'm not pulling a rabbit out of a hat. If I remember correctly, it was a Harvard Business Review article on, I think it was called why digital transformation failing is not about digital at all. I think that's what it was called, but you need to go look it up. It's a very common statistic actually around digital transformation.
Thank you so much. And so thinking of that, and you were saying HR has a role. HR even might even have an obligation to stop that drain from happening. Nabeela, so what do you think the role of, let's call this new HR, right? I mean, this is what we're trying to do. This is why you all 10,000 people are at this conference, right? We're hacking HR. What does the role of new HR look like, both during and even after this transformation?
Absolutely. I wanna double click on Tanvi's comment and I think feedback as well on the power of storytelling. I think it actually starts there for the HR practitioner in all of this as well, and anchoring it in a purpose that's beyond the digital transformation is a huge part of HR's role. This is really hard work, and I think I also have to agree very strongly with there is no destination in a digital transformation. It's just a continuous transformation of the business model, the operating model, right? We also have to acknowledge, I think, within the HR space that change management itself is also disrupted, right? So we have a VUCA world, we have disrupted change management models and thinking that we used to rely heavily on. We have a rate of change that is, continuously accelerating. And so, I mean, I think that's that language that we have to understand and accept to help others navigate all this is super important for HR practitioners to accept and kind of really upskill themselves on. What we really focused on in this, I think, as well from a people and culture perspective, our HR partners, is to talk about what we need to learn, but equally to spend as much time on what we need to unlearn. And that's one of the things also that is a really important conversation for our HR leaders to openly have and kind of lead their organizations through, because these types of transformations are just as much about the new things that we need to learn as they are about the things we need to unlearn. And acknowledging that is super important, and having an organizational conversation about the identity crises that will naturally emerge from these types of transformations. And that's super important. So I think there's 3 things that I would really suggest and recommend that HR practitioners do in these types of transformations. The number 1 is really anchor in a broader purpose. And I want to come back to that in just a second. Balancing the conversation around what the organization and organizational capabilities need to be learned, as well as what we need to unlearn. Because I think very often we don't talk about the things we need to decommission and let go of along this journey. And that's actually what people tend to struggle with the most. Everyone wants to upskill and reskill themselves. I mean, sign me up, right? But the hard thing is actually letting go of those things that we have so disparately anchored our professional capital in, and that we believe define our credibility as leaders. That's the part that gets really hard to let go of and acknowledge. And then I think it's, those are really some of the big movements that our HR practitioners need to focus on. I want to share a little bit, the other part of it, I think, coming back to the purpose. I shared this story earlier while we were kind of preparing, which is that we all know that purpose is a big part of what's driving people's motivation across the board, and it's an increasing part of people's motivation in everything they do. And I'm a huge, conscious capitalist. I believe in the power of business and how it can move the world and make it better. And then I remember when, Amazon bought Whole Foods, Whole Foods, I think growing up for me was kind of the example of that conscious capitalist company. taking care of people, the planet, and profit in a balanced way. And there's a lot of reasons why I think they, that acquisition happened. But that for me was kind of the signal that being a purpose-led company and just having a strong culture in and of itself is no longer enough. You also have to put that purpose and that culture in the context of continuous evolution, continuous transformation, and of course, digital technology, understanding that, bilingual language, knowing what to learn and unlearn, and putting it into a bigger context is all part of what we need our HR practitioners and partners to be partners with us on. The other part of this, I think, tied to purpose as well, is that digital transformations actually provide an opportunity to create a more long-term and sustainable operating model overall, if we choose to take it, right? So, we know that there's opportunities when it comes to sustainability and climate change, because digitalization by default isn't necessarily always more, climate positive. We know there's opportunities when it comes to income and gender equality. We know there's opportunities when it comes to data ethics and data privacy. So what point of view do we want to take as an organization on these really important topics that empower people and empower societies and that give people purpose through a transformation? I think those are the types of questions that our HR practitioners should be raising along this journey, so that the organizations, senior leaders really put those questions on the table for discussion and consideration.
And can I just say, Nabeela, when you first talked about it, I was so taken in with this idea, because I really think what you're talking about is, what is the ultimate potential of digital transformation beyond the obsession with technology that we have? You've got to see the forest from the trees. And I'm not sure whether people are nearly having enough conversation around this. So I'm really glad you're bringing in like purpose and sustainability, and ultimately, why are we doing all this? That's a question we have to ask, right? So just wanted to acknowledge you for sharing that. I really like that.
And I think that's what I think helps offset the challenging parts of it, right? When you know that what you're building, despite how hard it might be and how much, I think thrash there is naturally along the way, if you know what you're ultimately building is a more purpose-led, more sustainable, organization, that's kind of par and parcel with it. It makes the whole thing easier along the way.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. And I'm seeing over in our chat, both Karen and Brand had similar thoughts around, some newer, maybe smaller companies are able to more agilely adapt to transformation and to change this mindset, to approach purpose-driven and why are we doing this? But what about, the older, more established, more traditional organizations who might have their old ways? Have you seen any successes with these organizations in transforming? And how do we define what that success?
Yeah, I think that I think builds a little bit on what we just said, because there is no destination in this transformation. And I remember when I first started, I was in a roundtable of other senior HR leaders, and they were asking me, how are you going to define success? And for me, the success is in the progression of the organization's evolution. So that's the success. If we're evolving at the same rate of same pace as the world around us, or we're keeping pace and purpose, right? So that's where it is, can we keep the pace and the purpose of the continuous evolution of our business model while we're adding value and empowering people? So there's no one measurement of success. I think you have to break down each of those pillars of the things that you're trying to drive, whether it's modernization or adding more value to the customer, or it's empowering people through technology or data at the core, and identify both the qualitative and the quantitative measurements of progress. Because this is a continuous evolution, and it's a journey over many years. And there's also going to be some progress and regression along the way. So it's about the progressive evolution over time with very specific qualitative and quantitative measurements in each of the main pillars of the transformation. So, from our experience and my experience, there's no one measurement of success that, you could use to say, yes, the digital transformation was ultimately successful. And I don't know, Tanvi, or if you have any other reflections on that, but that's kind of my experience.
No, I really like what he said in terms of, success needs to be defined by organizations, given where they are in the journey. For some people, like I said, it may just right now be about the digitization piece, and that is what success looks like. So how much paper are you still using to get stuff done? Now, that could be a metric of success, surely. So you can't have global definitions of success. It depends on where you are in the continuum and what are you defining as success over there. The only thing I would add there is that I think that measurement of success can be, in digital transformation, can be put in two buckets, the way I see it. One has a lot to do with what they call as the RODIs, right? The return on digital investment, which they're trying to crunch the numbers and come up with their math about, we put in this much, is it coming back in terms of, the market sentiment or efficiency or speed to market or whatever might be the traditional metrics of success, even in the time of Henry Ford, I would say. Right? Did putting in this assembly line get us to move faster? But I think there is a second cluster of metrics of success around digital transformation, which I think is something we need to start thinking of, be that in terms of, are we a step closer to our purpose, right? Or even in things like, where are people spending their time? What is the quality of work that they are doing, right? Are they doing the higher value added work that we as humans are uniquely positioned to do in the age of artificial intelligence? Or are we still sitting and crunching some stuff out of Excel sheets or what there is? Right? How is the human spirit thriving in the organization? Are people leading their lives with a sense of purpose because the routine and the mundane has been given to the machines who do it best, right? So it's easy to talk about the traditional, what I call the iron metrics of, are we successful? But there is the human metrics of digital transformation that I think we are just about starting a conversation on. But I think going forward, these metrics might become more important. Like I came across one the other day, which, while it's not directly linked to digital transformation, I'll put it in the realm of transformation and not digital so much, right? It was a very outlandish idea, but interesting one, on what if we linked the stock price of a company to the health of the employees, okay? So like in terms of, whatever the biometrics you might want to look at, cholesterol or, endurance or whatever else, because ultimately how well your people will do is on their mental health, their emotional health, their physical health. And I thought that's interesting. So I think we'll see the conversation changing a little bit, where we will start talking about some other types of metrics, which it is long overdue that they became the focus of conversation versus just measuring everything in terms of speed to market and P&L, and which can coexist. But to your point, the opportunity is so much bigger, right?
100%. I couldn't, yeah. I think Brandon just had a note that people science is becoming a bigger deal, right? So again, what we were talking about, what you're just alluding to, Tanvi, is, this idea of you have to consider the people of your organization. They're the ones getting it done. Even though there is automation, you always are going to have that human component. And I wanted to go back a little bit to the conversation we were having about these older organizations. Are digital transformations happening? And I think that they are slowly. And I think, those of you who are attending this conversation with us, you're doing this for a reason. You see the value of having a transformation in your organization. And I think it just goes back to what Tanvi was saying about the culture of courage. You have to be the courageous one to push for the change that you see that needs to happen within your organization. And then you find, your supporters and the stakeholders that are going to get on board with you. And you also find the people who are maybe pushing against you, and figure out what you need to do to help convince them that this is the way to go. because Nabeela, I know as part of our prep call, you talked about leading transformation from a position of strength, and that really resonated with me. So even if everything's going great, like at IKEA, you still see the value that you have to change, you have to transform, or you will no longer be in that position of strength. And think we've seen that in many companies over the last decade, huge companies that were household names that no longer even exist anymore, right?
Absolutely. And I think that the business case for why to transform, I think is very, very strong. If someone's still struggling with that business case, then I think there starts to become a very compelling body of work that, that's very needed. I think that's also, I want to go back to Tanvi's point though, about everyone has a different starting point. We at IKEA definitely are, deciding to transform from a position of strength. And we're not waiting for a situation to ensue for where we need to transform because the stock market or the business is in a situation where that's required. But and we see that as a responsibility as part of our core to renew and improve and to make sure that we're a brand that's here for the long term. But I think that's it really depends on the starting point of the organization. I think large scale companies as a whole are already in some form of transformation, depending on the industry they're in. But every industry is affected at this point. I think in the furniture industry, I think there was sentiments before in certain industries that the digital disruption may not happen as much in certain sectors. But I think again we've passed that threshold. I think every sector now recognizes how digitalization and the fourth industrial revolution and these tectonic shifts that are happening across the economy are affecting the business. I think that's becoming even more evident and clear. I would say though that additionally here that I think that this need to take it in a way where the organizational appetite and organizational capacity is ready. I would say this is maybe moving a little bit into our next question around, how do you successfully lead these types of large scale transformation? There is a pace in our organizational capacity and organizational readiness that's definitely a prerequisite for launching these types of transformations. And that has to be signed off, at all levels of the organization. And then there's a lot of education and informing that needs to happen, especially in large organizations, to get both top leadership, middle leadership, and all leadership on board. We actually measure through our transformation journey some key questions, which is we ask all of our coworkers, do you know why we're transforming? Do you believe in the need for us to transform? Do you feel supported, through the transformation of us building a new IKEA? So there's definitely, a process of preparing and bringing the organization along through this journey that's super important.
This is so great. And I'm loving the participation in the chat. I mean, this is really hitting home with everyone. We will get to the questions, folks, that you've been putting in there, and I want to make sure we bring some of these points up with Nabeela and Tanvi. But before we do that, I do want to kind of get your final thoughts, ladies, on, reflecting throughout this entire transformation journey. What did we get wrong? It's so hard. I think especially some of these more established organizations where failure is it's a new concept to be okay when you get something wrong or when something's failed, right? That's another mindset shift. So how do we do that? How do we reflect on what we got wrong, what we would do differently? When during this transformation, should we be asking ourselves these questions? We'll start with Nabeela, but I'd like to hear.
Yeah, I think several things here. One, if I were to start all over again, I wouldn't call it a digital transformation. I would just say it's a continuous transformation. To Tanvi's point is that there's no destination in this. And I think the starting point of how we introduced it to the organization was absolutely right. We're going to change everything almost. We're going to build something new that's going to be here for the long term, and this is going to be a continuous transformation. So how do we prepare ourselves organizationally and from a people perspective for that, versus necessarily calling it a digital transformation? That's definitely one thing. The other thing reflection I have is really trying to have a conversation about the level of transparency through this journey, and we haven't talked so much about that. I think it's more tied to the storytelling, but that's actually something else that, we're a very open and transparent company, but then when you embark on a large scale transformation, that's something that we were continuously trying to, evaluate, because we don't, many things are being developed and delivered at the same time. And we talk about transforming and performing at the same time. So, when is something ready to be communicated to the masses? When do we, wait for things to be more mature in our thinking? Because we're also making a lot of, we're developing things, as we're also launching them. We're doing a lot of testing. We're testing in some markets and deploying in others. So I think that's something else that we're continuously evaluating. Then the third thing that I would say that we've learned through is really with modernization, digitalization efforts, there tends to be a prerequisite of standardization. And we need to do some degree of standardization and thereby centralization in order to modernize and digitize. And we, again, are a very entrepreneurial company. We really want decisions to be as close to those that are performing the role as possible. And we've really tried to, how do we create a establish common ways of working through, standardization where it adds value as a basis, and how do we balance that desire to have entrepreneurship and decision-making as close to the floor as possible while still doing standardization and modernization in a way that makes sense. So where's that balance between the two? Those are the three areas I would say we've taken a lot of learnings, and we've made some mistakes along the way. And I would say there's still conversations and learnings that we're having today on those three topics for sure.
Sense, and the fact that you can reflect and realize that you need to learn about that in these changes. I think often there's a lot of assumptions like, well, these people, they'll just know how to do it, or they'll figure it out. And a lot of these skill sets are not inherent. They do need to be learned. They need to be coached. They need to be modeled. And so to be able to acknowledge that you see that and to put the steps in place to address that, I think is part of that learning process. Tanvi, what do you think about, when do we reflect on this? How do we address what we got wrong during this entire transformation?
I was listening to Nabeela and I'm just thinking to myself, I said, she's moved so quickly through so many points there. Each of those points, by the way, is like half an hour conversation right there. So I hope we can come back to some of those points. The way I see it is there are three common mistakes I think we end up making around digital transformation. The first mistake I feel is we have left digital transformation to the digital folks. Okay, so in most companies, you go, who's in charge of digital transformation? The CIO, the CTO, now we've got the CDO, and then whatever else they'll come up with tomorrow morning, right? Because we just assume that because these people have got that technical degree or they understand the enterprise architecture and the cloud computing better than everybody else, that they should be in charge of digital transformation. I don't think so. I feel that the digital transformation, I tell people, think about transformation at least as much as you're thinking about digital. And if that's the case, then you can't leave it to the digital folks. It's a multidisciplinary effort, and it requires a human lens. So, be careful about who you are leaving digital transformation to. So that's one. The second one is that I think people would say that, it's a change management effort. I don't think so. I think it is far more complicated than a simple change management effort because it's really complex. We're talking about multiple levels at multiple stages of their journey, people's roles, some of which, will not exist tomorrow. How do we, get them out of those roles? What is the level of readiness, the cultural factors, the willingness? Technology never works in a vacuum. Technology is always implemented in a context. And how much do we understand of the human technology interaction within the organization? It's not a simple change management as usual. It is much more than that. So even if you're coming at it from a change management lens, you have to expand your repertoire of how you are going to approach this. And the third one is that, we talk about transformation. And I think there was a question in the chat about this on how organizations are doing. I think a lot of the organization, I might hazard a guess to say most organizations are nowhere near transformation. Where we are is a transition. And I know the word transition is not as glamorous as the word transformation, but it is certainly a lot more realistic. And to get the transformation right, you have to get the transition right. And that's where I think it was so beautiful, Nabeela, what you said about IKEA asking its people, are you feeling supported through this change? It's a question that most companies are not asking. They're just sending more and more change effort down, the hierarchy and expecting that it will happen. People need to feel supported. So getting transition right is very critical for getting transformation right. It's, we are in the bridging state right now. Let's not rush it. Let's not feel like we will wake up tomorrow and the transformation will happen. This is my favorite, talking of storytelling. Now, this is data and storytelling together, yeah? It does not take 9 women to be pregnant for 1 month each to have a baby. It takes 1 woman for 9 months to be pregnant to have a baby. You cannot rush the process, okay? So given that there are 3 women on this, I think we kind of have some, not that men don't, but that's a separate conversation. But I guess what I'm saying is respect the fact that transition leads to transformation, right? So just to kind of recap, don't leave digital transformation to the digital people alone. It's much more than change management, and focus on the transition state to get to the transformation state is what I would say.
I think that I love that story. So thank you so much for that. I just want to comment really briefly on it. That's your statement about transition to transformation. I think this goes back to what I also said at the beginning, is what's the organizational capability, capacity, and readiness? And that is, a huge part of how do we prepare the organization's kind of muscle to do this on a continuous model. And that's, I remember very clearly when we kind of kicked this off, and I asked I had a room of leaders, and I said, who's prepared for, change? And people raised their hand. Okay, who's prepared for, large scale transformation? And people kind of like, oh, okay. Who's prepared for large scale transformation that will never end? No one raised their hand. And I think that's what we're actually moving into. And I think the readiness and kind of organizational capacity and preparedness, and how do you build that muscle with an organization, is something that definitely needs to be taken into account. And then something we've also learned through our journey as well.
Nabeela, I saw a meme. Being an adult is constantly saying, well, it'll be better next week. I think that's what you did to those leaders there. Like, you showed them that, what, this is just the new normal, right? This is the new normal. This is what, in order to be competitive, in talent, be competitive in the marketplace, we have to constantly be thinking about, how do we change? How do we transform? I thank you both, and I'm sorry, Nabeela, did you have something you wanted to say?
No, I just want to say one other comment, I think, for the HR and people in culture, members here as well. I think one of the things I've also been a strong advocate for is that when you look at the different, practices within people and culture, generally speaking, there hasn't been a lot of investment in organizational development, kind of this large scale enterprise, transformational expertise. And I think Tanvi's point, there's actually, I don't know if it was an HBR article or some other article that said, don't give your digital transformation to a digital person. So there's definitely content to that point. But what we've really been trying to do is build long-term sustainable organizational capacity and competence to transform, a transformation that will never end. So I think it's also kind of a retrospective question to take back to say, what is your organization's capacity and competence level to do this on a continuous model, and how do you advocate for that build internally? Because I think a lot of companies have historically relied on a lot of external expertise to do this, and that's something that is can also be challenged in this conversation as well.
Yeah, something very important I hope everybody has taken from what you have just said, because it's a process of continuous transformation. We also need to talk about things like the fatigue that comes with this constant, the runway that keeps getting extended at some level. And we are not nearly talking enough about how to manage that fallout. So somebody had asked a really good question, which I think is worth pondering over, on the dark side of digital transformation. And I think the dark side of digital transformation definitely has got to do with the irreverence with which we treat human potential in terms of what we think it's capable of and what it's not capable of. Let's just get really, clear that human beings get exhausted, constantly living in a, state of schizophrenia about, are we taking this road or that? And then today you told me this one. Now, that's where the storytelling comes in, on helping people feel that we are still on a map. It's not like we have let you into the wild, but the human piece and not acknowledging what it takes is the dark side of digital transformation, the way I see it.
Meighan, I don't want to take us off course from a timing perspective, but I think that you're absolutely spot on. I think that the fatigue in this process, and I think, again, if we were to benchmark our kind of internal capability and resources to lead other parts of the business, and again, versus the internal capability and resources to lead this continuous evolution of an operating model and transformation, I think this is definitely an arm of an organization that I think will develop and build over time. And it's something, within our transformation, where we literally carved out dedicated full-time, resources and scaled it so that we do have the internal capability and competence to support the organization throughout this, journey for the long haul. And that's something I think has really enabled us to continue to transform successfully. So couldn't agree more.
Again, I think that ties into, where does this transformation live? And I think you're so right, Tanvi, that it often starts in the IT organization, but really people are at the heart of it. And so again, all of you on the discussion, I do encourage you to be courageous and stand up for what you know is right, and keep these really important learnings in mind as you're going through this constant continual change. We had another question, which I thought was so interesting. She asks, if capital is the food of digital transformation, if you're a nonprofit or a small organization, is digital transformation even a reasonable expectation? I'd love to hear.
I can start. I mean, I first of all, I have the pleasure of sitting on a board of a non-for-profit, and actually I think has taken a very proactive perspective on transformation. I think unfortunately there's not as many available resources, both internally and externally, for non-for-profits to kind of keep up with the needs that they also have to digitize and transform their operating models and the way that they do business. I mean, every non-for-profit in all sectors are also being transformed. So I actually think this is one area where we need to step back and, from an ecosystem perspective, look at what resources and access do non-profits have to also build in these types of transformations. But they definitely have the same need, even if they may not have the resources or the kind of internal capital to do it. The need definitely exists for them as well. I don't know, Tanvi, if you have any other experience or reflections on that.
So I'll take like an appreciative inquiry take on this. Yes, non-for-profits don't have the resources, but then they also don't have the constraints of the corporates, right? They're not being looked at with that, Wall Street mentality of, get on and then now what's the return and all of that. So to some extent, is the glass half empty or is the glass half full is a perspective you should take. I think that even for not-for-profit organizations, right, I think it comes back to the question of, I think a lot of technology now is becoming more and more accessible. We all don't have to buy that, Oracle ERP or the SAP massive thing. And, SAP is a client of mine. Let me tell you, they are working very hard to get to the SME segment and to serve their needs, and, not for profits. Sometimes they're SME, sometimes they're not. But I guess what I'm saying is that, yes, capital may be an issue, but it's not like every capital-rich corporate is getting it right. If that's all it took to get it right, we would have had a much higher success rate of digital transformation. So, see what the opportunity of it is and see what you can come up with. That's what I would add.
An excellent point. They're wasting trillions of dollars and not nailing it, right? That's so true. Another question, I think it goes back to what you were talking about, the dark side of digitization. It was Karen and both Brandon talking about their concern with technology. How do we avoid exploitation, unethical data, and technology usage within the organization? What about the AI biases that we've seen? That tech doesn't always get it right, but yet we're still automating more and more. What are some things that you've seen, or what's some guidance for our HR professionals, especially when you're seeing technology being misused?
I can just really quickly, I think I've spoken on this. This is where, again, you have an opportunity to influence the conversation. So, for example, we are putting data at the core of our transformation and putting it at the heart of our company. Thereby, we had an opportunity to then say, what is our point of view when it comes to data ethics and data privacy? What position do we want to take? Who do we want to be in this conversation? And here's our opportunity then to establish a set of data ethics and data principles that is in line with our culture and our values and siding with the many people. And we just recently released a set of data ethics, and we're working on a set of principles that actually will transform the way we engage with our customers around their privacy and their data, empowering them to then define how we use their data in a new way. That actually was born from our digital transformation. That opportunity to have that conversation and then make that decision, that came out of our digital transformation. The question was put on the table, and then we took it to really decide what position we want to take. Same thing when it comes to the future of work. We know that this is going to have, digitalization has disruptive effects on the future of work. Then we're asking ourselves the same question, what position do we want to take in society as a whole? What role do we want to play with our coworkers, when it comes to the future of work? Same thing, as I mentioned, on equality or on sustainability. So this is where, you have that role to play to put those really, controversial, purpose-led questions on the table and ask have the conversation about what role do you want to play as a company. This is not, there's a lot of uncharted territory. There's a lot of gray. There's a lot of uncertainty. And it's not like there is a perfect playbook here that you can just follow. Society as a whole is trying to figure this out. But I think companies can take a lead, and great companies, do. And I think that's part of, again, the role of large organizations to shape the world, or organizations as a whole, not just necessarily large organizations, but that's the opportunity. Tanvi, I'll let you continue on that, I think.
Yeah, I'm turning back because I was looking at my bookshelf. Last time when I was at the airport, I picked up this book. I think it's called AI Doesn't Hate You. And it's a bit of a long-winded read, but it kind of gets into the history of development of AI and, where, in the valley where the hub is and their thinking. The only thing I can tell you after I finished reading that book was I seriously hope that all the people who are in the tech world, who are handling these pieces of machine learning and artificial intelligence that we don't always have access to, have a much broader worldview of respecting people and their privacy and their data. Because in that quest for efficiency, and that quest for trying to create systems that we hope will spit out the answer, we are not always recognizing that these are human beings that they're dealing with. So just to give you a really quick example, I'm mindful of time. To cut a long story short, I wanted some information, and more and more I'm finding the response we get is, oh, data privacy. We can't share that with you, data privacy. I'm like, no, you can. Just check with the person if they're okay with it and then share it with me. That's what it means. So data privacy, the two parts of it, when they need it, then data privacy is not that big a concern. But when the consumers or the clients or the customers or the employees need it, then suddenly there's a wall of data privacy that kind of, pops up. So I think it is incumbent on HR professionals that when we are talking about, data mining and data privacy, that they take perspective both of the users of that data and the suppliers of that data. It can't be a one-sided, I'm going to use it when it makes sense for me to get that return on investment, and I'm going to ignore you as an individual. I feel the part of HR's role is to take a more holistic view of both sides of this conversation when we're talking about, how data will be used in organizations, because data is the new oil, as they say, right?
Absolutely. One of the comments was we needed more than an hour, and I couldn't agree more. I think let's do this again tomorrow. I can't thank you enough, both Nabeela and Tanvi, for your insight. Some of the comments are insightful, refreshing, visionary conversation that we had today. And thank you for the active participants, the active chat. That really does add to the conversation. It felt like we're all. So again, kudos to Enrique for creating this environment for us to have these really important conversations about what the future of work is going to look like. Tanvi and Nabeela, thank you for your time. Thanks for joining us later in your days. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you all again for joining us, and continue the conversation. Let's connect on LinkedIn, and I hope you're able to attend more of the conference together.
Thank you.